few hundred feet in the air, you can clearly see how much shoreline is exposed. And the docks, well, they are sitting high and dry because the water no longer reaches them very far, too. So yesterday, water data from Texas reports it's at 10.5 rather.
For generations, water scarcity on a citywide scale seemed like a problem that happens somewhere else, far from the United States, far from modern infrastructure, far from communities connected to one of the world's largest economies. Yet today, a major Texas city is confronting a reality that once appeared unimaginable. In Corpus Christi, home to nearly 500,000 residents, water reserves are shrinking at an alarming pace. Officials now release weekly updates tracking reservoir conditions and estimating how long supplies may last if drought conditions continue. Discussions that once focused on decades of planning have shifted to months, and in some cases, mere weeks. What makes this situation especially troubling is that there was no catastrophic event that suddenly triggered the crisis. No major hurricane destroyed critical infrastructure. No major contamination event poisoned the water supply. The pumps still run, the treatment plants still operate, the pipelines remain intact. Instead, the danger emerged gradually through years of policy decisions, rapid industrial growth, and a belief that future water supplies would always be available when needed. Today, the region's two primary reservoirs, Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon Reservoir, stand at historically low levels. Both depend heavily on water flowing through the Nueces River system, but prolonged drought and relentless heat have dramatically reduced those inflows. Each month that passes without significant rainfall pushes the reservoirs closer to critical thresholds. But nature alone is not responsible for the growing emergency. The larger debate centers on who uses the water that remains. Many people assume residential consumption is the main source of pressure on the system. In reality, some of the largest demands come from industry. Corpus Christi has transformed into one of America's most important energy and manufacturing hubs. Refineries, petrochemical plants, export terminals, steel facilities, and industrial complexes consume enormous quantities of water every day. Over time, industrial demand has grown to levels that far exceed the consumption of individual households across the region. Meanwhile, residents face increasingly strict conservation measures. Lawn watering schedules have been reduced. Outdoor water use is heavily restricted. Violations can result in significant fines. Families are encouraged to monitor every gallon they use, while many industrial facilities continue operating under special exemptions and long-term agreements. That contrast has become one of the most controversial aspects of the crisis. Questions intensified after local leaders approved major water contracts connected to large-scale industrial expansion projects. Critics warned that the city was committing future water supplies to corporations without fully accounting for worsening drought conditions and long-term climate risks. Supporters argued that the projects would generate jobs, attract investment, and strengthen the local economy. The developments moved forward. Yet as new industrial capacity came online, reservoir levels continued falling. For many residents, the timing reinforced a growing perception that economic expansion had been prioritized over long-term water security. The issue becomes even more sensitive when examining water pricing. Large industrial users often receive enormous allocations at rates negotiated through long-term agreements, while ordinary customers face higher costs and stricter penalties for relatively small increases in personal consumption. Whether justified or not, many residents see a system that appears to operate under two different sets of rules, one for households, another for powerful industrial interests. Those interests hold considerable influence throughout the region. The port of Corpus Christi has evolved into one of the most strategically important energy corridors in North America. Massive investments from oil, gas, petrochemical, and manufacturing companies have transformed the area into an economic powerhouse. With billions of dollars at stake, industrial expansion has become deeply intertwined with local politics and economic planning. Growth is frequently presented as essential for employment, tax revenue, and regional prosperity. But as water becomes increasingly scarce, many residents are beginning to ask whether the costs of that growth were fully considered. Some communities have already spent decades living alongside the consequences of industrial development. Neighborhoods such as Hillcrest, near heavy refinery infrastructure, have experienced dramatic changes over the years. Residents have watched industrial facilities expand around them, while portions of their community gradually disappeared beneath redevelopment projects and industrial construction. Many families describe feeling overlooked as economic priorities repeatedly outweighed neighborhood concerns. Now, with water scarcity becoming a central issue, some fear the imbalance could grow even more pronounced. The situation might look different today if alternative supplies had been developed earlier. For years, officials explored plans for a large desalination facility capable of converting seawater from the Gulf Coast into drinking water. Supporters viewed desalination as a long-term insurance policy against drought. But the proposal sparked fierce debate. Projected costs climbed dramatically. Environmental groups raised concerns about marine impacts and brine disposal. Questions emerged about financing and the long-term burden on taxpayers. Ultimately, the project failed to gain approval. At the time, many viewed the decision as fiscally responsible. Now, with reservoirs approaching dangerous levels, critics argue that one of the region's most significant backup options was abandoned just as it was becoming necessary. In response, emergency measures are underway. Crews are drilling groundwater wells throughout portions of the Nueces River Basin in an effort to supplement dwindling reservoir supplies. The goal is to buy time and stabilize the system while officials search for longer-term solutions. Even engineers involved in these efforts acknowledge the limitations. Groundwater can help reduce immediate pressure, but it cannot indefinitely replace the vast quantities of water historically stored in the region's reservoirs. Furthermore, neighboring communities facing similar drought conditions are increasingly turning to the same underground resources, raising concerns about future aquifer stress. The challenge facing Corpus Christi extends far beyond city limits. Across the United States, communities have built economic strategies around assumptions that water availability would remain relatively stable. Industrial growth, population expansion, and infrastructure planning often relied on historical climate patterns that may no longer reflect future realities. As droughts intensify and weather patterns become less predictable, those assumptions are being tested. Some experts compare the situation to the crisis that nearly pushed Cape Town, South Africa to day zero in 2018, a scenario in which municipal water systems came dangerously close to failure. Cape Town ultimately avoided disaster through aggressive conservation efforts, strict reductions in usage, and eventually improved rainfall. Corpus Christi faces a different challenge. Residents are already operating under significant restrictions. Industrial consumption remains substantial. Rainfall forecasts offer little certainty, and many major facilities depend on continuous operation, making large-scale reductions difficult without serious economic consequences. That reality has sparked an increasingly heated debate. If industries reduce water use dramatically, the regional economy could suffer, potentially affecting thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in activity. If industrial consumption remains largely unchanged, residents may face even tighter restrictions as supplies continue declining. Neither option is painless. Meanwhile, time continues to run short. Emergency planning efforts are accelerating. Groundwater projects operate around the clock. New discussions surrounding desalination have quietly resurfaced. Political campaigns are increasingly focused on water management and allocation policies. Every stakeholder is attempting to secure its future before conditions worsen. Yet one critical factor remains entirely beyond human control: rain. Without substantial and sustained precipitation, every solution currently on the table merely slows the decline rather than reversing it. And so the reservoirs continue to shrink. Restrictions continue to tighten. Industrial facilities continue operating. Emergency crews continue drilling. Residents continue asking how one of America's fastest-growing industrial regions found itself confronting the possibility of severe water shortages. The answer is uncomfortable because it cannot be blamed on a single drought, a single politician, or a single decision. It is the result of decades of choices made under the assumption that water would always be available when needed. For years, scarcity was treated as tomorrow's problem. Now, tomorrow has arrived, and Corpus Christi is learning a lesson that communities across the American Southwest may soon face as well. When the reservoirs start running dry, there are no quick fixes left.